Imagine for a second that the city you live in is just burned to the absolute ground.
Right, completely leveled.
Yeah, leveled. And your language is formally banned by some new occupying force. The leaders you grew up watching on television are executed, and this massive foreign empire takes total, unquestioned control of your daily life.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It's a nightmare. But historically speaking, when this happens, your civilization is dead. I mean, the religion is forgotten, the culture is erased, and your people are eventually just absorbed by whoever holds the swords.
Yeah, that is essentially the universal law of human history.
Exactly. You build a sandcastle, and eventually the crushing tide of time and conquest washes it completely away.
It is the natural, unavoidable life cycle of almost every major civilization we have on record. I mean, we see it with the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the mighty Roman Empire, the Aztecs. They rise, they reach this staggering peak of power, and then they fracture. Or they're conquered and they just dissolve into something completely unrecognizable from their origins.
Right.
To survive total imperial subjugation without losing your core identity is basically statistically impossible.
But today, for you listening, our fellow learner, we are diving into the one massive exception to that rule. We're doing a deep dive into a civilization that looked at total annihilation over and over again for 2.5 millennia and basically said, no, we are going to absorb you instead.
Which is just wild to think about.
We are talking about Iran. Over the last 2,500 years, the land and the people we now call Iran have been conquered by the Greeks, the Arabs, the Turks, and the Mongols, where we're talking about apocalyptically violent invasions.
Capitals leveled, libraries thrown into rivers.
Yeah. By all conventional metrics of historical trauma, the Persian identity should have vanished a dozen times over.
It really should have. The linguistic and cultural continuity we see in Iran is an absolute anomaly.
And that is the sprawling 2,500-year mystery we are unpacking today, based on the historical sources we've gathered. Like, how did a land that was repeatedly crushed under the boots of foreign armies manage to turn its conquerors into something distinctly Iranian?
That's the core question, right?
Yeah, and if most empires are sandcastles, I think we can look at Iran like a sponge.
A sponge, I like that.
Think about it. You can submerge a sponge in water. You can crush it in your fist. You can completely saturate it with a totally different liquid. But when you pull it out and the pressure releases...
It is fundamentally still a sponge.
Exactly. Its internal structure remains intact. It absorbs what surrounds it, but it doesn't lose its shape.
To understand the architecture of that sponge, though, like why that specific resilience exists in this specific place, we really have to strip away the politics and the borders.
Okay, where do we start?
We have to look at the physical Earth. We have to start with the geography of the Iranian plateau, because in the ancient world, geography wasn't just a backdrop where events occasionally happened.
All right, it wasn't just scenery.
Exactly. Geography dictated the absolute limits of human possibility. It was destiny.
So set the stage for us. When we say the Iranian plateau, what kind of environment are we actually talking about?
Picture this massive, natural geological fortress rising out of the earth. We are talking about roughly 1 million square miles of highly elevated heartland.
1 million square miles, that's huge.
It's massive. And to the west, acting as a sheer, jagged wall against Mesopotamia, you have the Zagros Mountains.
Right.
Sweeping along the northern border near the Caspian Sea, you have the Alborz mountain range.
Right.
And then sitting right in the middle, trapped between these mountain walls, are vast, unforgiving salt deserts. The Dashti Kavir and the Dashti Lut.
So it's a fortress, but the inside of the fortress is a brutal place to live.
Absolutely.
I mean, the winters in those mountain passes are freezing, and the summers in the Central Plains bakes the earth until it literally cracks.
Yeah, so any society that took root in this environment had to be deeply, fundamentally tenacious just to survive the climate.
Right.
But the true defining factor is the location of this fortress. The Iranian plateau sits at the absolute crossroads of the ancient world.
It's like the main intersection.
Exactly. It is the inescapable land bridge connecting Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean in the west with the steppes of Central Asia to the north and the Indian subcontinent to the east.
Which means if you are living there, you are standing in the middle of the busiest highway in antiquity. You literally cannot isolate yourself.
No, not at all. Every migrating tribe, every expanding empire, every merchant caravan has to come through your living room.
And when you are geographically forced to interact with every major current of human history, you develop a culture that knows how to bend without breaking.
Precisely. You learn to negotiate, to adapt, and to integrate. I mean, thousands of years before the Common Era, you had the Elamites building a highly sophisticated society centered on the city of Susa in the southwest.
They were contemporaries of the Sumerians, right?
They were. But the transformative demographic shift happens around 1500 BCE.
Okay, who is moving in?
Waves of semi-nomadic peoples migrating south and west onto the plateau from the vast steppes of Central Asia. These are the Indo-Iranians.
Got it.
In their ancient tongue, they called themselves Aryans, which simply translated to noble or honorable.
Right.
They brought a deeply ingrained pastoral culture. They brought horses, which totally revolutionized transport and warfare.
Oh, horses change everything.
They do. And they also brought a profound reverence for fire, which would later become the central, blazing symbol of their religious identity.
Wow.
Over centuries, these tribes consolidated into two major groups. In the cooler, mountainous northwestern highlands, you had the Medes. And drifting further south and east into a rugged region they called Persia, you had the Persians.
But for a long time, the Medes and the Persians weren't running the show at all. They were just these scattered, disorganized clans paying heavy tribute to the biggest, most terrifying bully in the ancient Middle East.
The Assyrian Empire.
Yes, the Assyrians. From our sources, the Assyrians basically looked at the Iranian plateau as a giant free farm for horses and conscripted soldiers.
Yeah, they would just march in, take what they wanted, and leave. The Assyrian military machine was unmatched, and they ruled through calculated terror.
It sounds awful.
It was. And the Medes suffered under this dynamic until a specific chieftain emerges around 700 BCE, a man named Deioces.
Deioces.
According to the accounts preserved by the Greek historian Herodotus, Deioces understood a fundamental political truth. As long as the Median tribes were internally fractured, they would always be prey to the Assyrians.
But he doesn't unite them through military conquest, which is what you'd expect. He does it through this completely bizarre psychological trick.
It's so clever.
He builds this incredible region-wide reputation as an impeccably fair judge. If you have a dispute over land or livestock, you take it to Deioces.
He becomes the single, indispensable man for keeping the peace among these notoriously hot-headed tribes.
Right, and once everybody relies on him, he fakes his own retirement.
Yes. It is a brilliant piece of political theater. He suddenly announces that arbitrating their endless squabbles is distracting him from managing his own estate, so he steps down and goes home.
And predictably, without his neutral arbitration, the tribal disputes explode. The region plunges into utter chaos and lawlessness.
They basically get a terrifying taste of life without a justice system.
Yeah, so the tribal leaders panic, they ride out to his estate, and they literally beg him to come back.
But he doesn't just ask for his old job back. He says, I will only do this if you make me your king, build me a palace, and give me a personal guard.
And they agree. Just like that, the Medes have a centralized monarchy.
Yep. Deioces immediately orders the construction of Ecbatana, a permanent capital city with concentric fortified walls. He gives the Medes a geographical center of gravity.
Which is huge for them.
It is. His descendants build on this foundation. His grandson, Cyrus, takes the next crucial step. He modernizes the haphazard tribal warriors into a structured, professional army divided by weapons class.
Spearmen, cavalry, archers.
Exactly. And then Cyrus looks west.
Because he sees that the invincible Assyrian Empire is suddenly vulnerable. They're tearing themselves apart with internal civil wars.
Right. So Cyrus forms a strategic alliance with the Babylonians, who are also desperate to throw off the Assyrian yoke. And in 612 BCE, this combined force achieves the unthinkable.
They march on Nineveh.
Yes, the glittering, terrifying capital of Assyria, and they completely destroy it. The Assyrian Empire, which had terrorized the region for centuries, literally ceases to exist.
And suddenly the Medes are the new superpower. They have this massive, unassailable empire. But wait, while the Medes are basking in their new global dominance, what are their cousins, the Persians, doing down in the south?
Well, the Persians of the province of Parsa had become vassals to the Median kings.
Okay.
And growing up right in the heart of the Median royal court in Ecbatana is a young Persian prince named Cyrus.
Ah, here we go.
He is the grandson of the Median king Astyages through his mother. Cyrus is essentially a hostage guest, absorbing an unparalleled education in statecraft.
He's just watching and learning.
Exactly. He watches the daily mechanics of the Median Empire. He learns how power is projected, how taxes are collected, and crucially, he identifies the structural weaknesses and resentments brewing among the nobility.
So in 550 BCE, Cyrus makes his move. He launches a revolt against his own grandfather.
He does.
But reading through the accounts of this rebellion, It's not what you'd expect from an ancient uprising. It wasn't a bloody, scorched earth campaign.
Far from it. When King Astyages sent the Median army to crush his grandson, the army mutinied.
Wow.
The Median commanders, who were already alienated by Astyages' harsh rule, simply defected to Cyrus in the middle of the battlefield. The capital, Ecbatana, surrendered without a siege. The city didn't burn.
And this is the moment that defines the sponge mentality perfectly. Cyrus overthrows the king, but he keeps the entire empire intact. He actually absorbs the Median nobles into his own court.
He does. He adopts their style of dress. He keeps their administrative protocols.
I keep picturing Cyrus as the ultimate modern corporate CEO, executing a hostile merger and acquisition.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. He buys out the rival company. But instead of firing everybody and burning the corporate headquarters to the ground for an ego boost, he walks in, looks around, and says, you know what? The middle management here is actually highly competent. The supply chains work. Let's keep everybody in their cubicles, keep the revenue flowing, and just change the logo on the building.
That analogy perfectly captures his genius. Cyrus recognized that the physical and administrative machinery of an empire is infinitely more valuable than the fleeting psychological satisfaction of destroying it.
It's so pragmatic.
It was an unprecedented shift. I mean, the Assyrian model had been rule by terror comply, or we will flay you alive and salt your fields. Cyrus introduced rule by tolerance.
And he puts that exact theory to the ultimate test in 539 BCE when he decides to go after Babylon.
A massive undertaking.
At this point, Babylon is the crown jewel of the world. It has walls so thick that historians claim they raced 4-horse chariots side by side on top of them. A direct military siege should have taken years and cost tens of thousands of lives. How does he take it without a protracted bloodbath?
By weaponizing the internal politics of his enemy.
Sneaky.
Very. The Babylonian king, Nabonidus, had deeply alienated his own people. He neglected the worship of Babylon's chief god, Marduk, and elevated a moon god instead.
Oh, people don't like when you mess with their gods.
The powerful priests and the wealthy merchant class were furious. So Cyrus positioned himself not as a foreign conqueror coming to destroy them, but as a pious liberator chosen by their own gods to restore order.
So when the Persian army shows up, the Babylonians literally open the impenetrable gates from the inside.
Cyrus walks into the greatest city on earth without shedding a drop of blood, and his first act is to march into the grand temple and grasp the hands of the statue of Marduk.
Wow. What does that do?
That was the ancient, highly specific ritual required for legitimate Babylonian kingship. By performing it, he signaled to the entire populace, I am not here to erase your culture. I am here to participate in it as your rightful sovereign.
And this leads directly to the creation of the Cyrus cylinder, which is often called the first declaration of human rights, though I know historians debate that later.
They do, but it's still remarkable.
It's this small clay cylinder covered in cuneiform script. And what he writes on it is mind-blowing for the time period. He essentially says, I respect your local gods. I am officially outlawing the forced mass deportations that the previous empires used to crush rebellions. And if you or your ancestors were deported, you are free to go home.
That specific decree had monumental historical consequences, most notably for the Jewish people who had been violently exiled in Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar decades earlier.
Right.
Cyrus provided them with the funds and the royal protection to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Because of this, Cyrus the Great is the only non-Jewish figure in the Hebrew Bible to be explicitly referred to as a Messiah or anointed one.
But let me push back on this narrative of Cyrus the Benevolent for a second. Is it really possible that the man who conquered the known world was just a deeply enlightened philosophical humanist? Or are we looking at a highly calculated, incredibly cynical PR strategy designed to keep a massive empire from rebelling?
It is the ultimate historical debate, but the logistics of his empire provide the answer. Cyrus was governing a landmass that stretched from the Aegean coast of modern-day Turkey all the way to the borders of India.
That is impossibly huge for that era.
You simply cannot govern a territory that's geographically massive, containing dozens of different languages, religions, and ethnic groups, relying purely on brute force.
You'd run out of soldiers.
You would need a garrison of 1 million men just to put down the daily revolts. Rule by tolerance was a logistical necessity. By granting his subjects religious and cultural autonomy, he removed their primary motivation for rebellion.
I see.
In exchange for letting them keep their gods and their customs, they gave him their absolute compliance and, most importantly, their taxes.
So it is pragmatism masked as benevolence.
Precise.
But even the most brilliant system faces a crisis when the founder dies. Cyrus is eventually killed on a military campaign in the northeast.
Yes.
And his tomb at Pasargadae is amazingly humble for a man who ruled the world. It's just a simple stone structure. The ancient sources say the inscription essentially read, "I am Cyrus, who founded the empire of the Persians. Do not begrudge me this small monument."
His death triggers a murky, highly contested period. His son Cambyses successfully conquers Egypt, but dies under mysterious circumstances on his way back.
Okay.
Suddenly, there is a vacuum, and a man named Gaumata seizes the throne, claiming to be Cyrus's younger son, Bardia.
Except, according to the official story, the real Bardia had been secretly assassinated years earlier, so Gaumata is an imposter.
Well, that is the narrative pushed by the man who violently overthrows him, a young, brilliant Persian military commander named Darius.
That's convenient.
Very. Darius, along with 6 co-conspirators from noble Persian families, assassinates Gaumata and claims the throne for himself in 522 BCE. By any objective modest standard, it was a classic military coup.
And if you just executed a coup and killed the guy sitting on the throne, your biggest immediate threat isn't a foreign army, it's terrible PR.
Exactly.
You have to convince an empire of tens of millions of people that you aren't just a power-hungry usurper, but the divinely chosen legitimate king of kings. How does Darius sell that story?
He creates arguably the most spectacular, enduring piece of political propaganda in the ancient world.
Okay, what is it?
He commands engineers to carve a massive relief into a sheer limestone cliff face at Mount Behistun. It's 600 feet above the main, heavily trafficked road between Babylon and Ecbatana.
So every merchant, every soldier, every diplomat traveling the royal highway has to look up and see it.
Precisely. The carving shows Darius standing triumphantly over the defeated rebel leaders, holding a bow, with the winged symbol of the god Ahura Mazda hovering above him, granting divine sanction to his rule.
Like God says I'm supposed to be here.
Exactly. But the real genius was the text. He had the story of his righteous victory over the lies of the impostor carved in 3 different administrative languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian.
Which turned out to be the greatest gift imaginable for modern historians.
That really was.
Because in the 19th century, British scholars used the Behistun inscription to finally decode ancient cuneiform. It was literally the Rosetta Stone for understanding Mesopotamian history.
Without Darius's massive ego project, thousands of years of human history might still be unreadable.
That's incredible. But Darius wasn't just a master of propaganda. He took the massive, slightly unwieldy empire Cyrus built and turned it into a finely tuned administrative machine.
Darius is the architect of a commended bureaucracy. He divided the sprawling empire into roughly 20 administrative provinces called satrapies.
Right.
Each was governed by a regional executive called a satrap. But Darius understood human nature. He knew that if you give one man total control over the taxes, the army, and the law in a distant province, that man will eventually declare independence.
I mean, obviously. So how do you prevent the governors from going rogue when it takes weeks just to send a message to the capital?
You build a system of overlapping, paranoid checks and balances. The satrap was in charge of civilian administration and collecting the king's taxes.
Okay.
However, the military commander of that province did not answer to the satrap. He reported directly to Darius.
Smart.
Furthermore, a royal financial inspector, known as the King's Eye, audited the province and also reported directly to the throne.
So the satrap couldn't raise a secret army to rebel because he didn't control the generals, and he couldn't embezzle the tax money to hire mercenaries because the accountant was watching his every move.
Exactly. It's incredibly modern.
Yeah.
And to physically connect all these moving parts, Darius builds the Royal Road.
Right, the Royal Road, an engineered highway stretching 1,700 miles from the city of Sardis near the Aegean coast, cutting all the way down to the administrative capital of Susa in the Persian heartland.
1,700 miles in the ancient world is an incomprehensible distance.
It really is.
Yeah.
But they set up this system of relay stations, spaced exactly 1 day's ride apart. A royal courier would ride at a full gallop until his horse was exhausted, arrive at a station, hand the mail pouch to a fresh rider on a fresh horse, and that rider would take off immediately.
Like the Pony Express.
Exactly. Using this system, a message could travel from Turkey to Iran in about 7 days. The Greek historian Herodotus was absolutely staggered by the efficiency.
He was.
He wrote this famous line about the couriers: "Neither snow nor rain, nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds.
A phrase that is deeply ingrained in modern culture?
Yeah, it literally became the unofficial motto inscribed on the James A. Farley Post Office building in New York City.
Oh, wow.
The legacy of Darius's logistics is still sitting in Manhattan. He also standardizes the economy by minting a high-purity gold coin called the Daric, and he begins construction on Persepolis.
A palatial complex of unimaginable wealth and artistry designed to awe visiting dignitaries.
The empire is humming. It is a perfectly oiled machine, but eventually the machine grinds against something it can't quite absorb.
Right. On the far western frontier of the empire, along the coast of modern-day Turkey, were several wealthy, Greek-speaking city-states collectively known as Ionia.
Okay.
They were subjects of the Persian Empire, but in 499 BCE, chafing under the taxation of their local tyrants backed by the Persians, the Ionians revolted.
And critically, they asked their cousins across the Aegean Sea for military assistance.
Yes. The city of Athens sent 20 warships,
which turned a regional tax revolt into an international incident. The Athenians marched inland alongside the Ionians, and they actually burned the city of Sardis, which was a major Persian regional capital.
Darius was apoplectic. To have a fringe group of people from a rocky peninsula across the sea dare to burn a Persian capital was an unforgivable insult to the King of Kings.
I can imagine.
Legend has it that Darius commanded a servant to whisper in his ear 3 times every time he sat down to dinner. "Master, remember the Athenians."
Wow, he held a grudge.
He did. He crushed the Ionian revolt, but he determined that mainland Greece had to be pacified to secure the western border.
And this triggers the Greco-Persian Wars, which we in the West have been making movies and writing epic poems about for 2 millennia.
Absolutely.
Darius sends a punitive expedition that culminates in the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE, where the heavily armored Athenian infantry shocks the Persian forces and drives them back to their ships.
But Darius dies before he can mount a proper return invasion.
Right, so his son, Xerxes, takes up the mantle in 480 BCE with a truly massive army.
This is the invasion that dominates Western historical memory. Xerxes building a pontoon bridge across the Hellespont, the legendary stand of King Leonidas, and the 300 Spartans holding the narrow pass at Thermopylae.
Right.
And finally, the Greek naval triumph at Battle of Salamis, where the maneuverable Greek triremes decimated the heavier Persian fleet in narrow waters, forcing Xerxes to retreat to Asia.
So, we are always taught about Marathon and Thermopylae and Salamis as these ultimate existential David versus Goliath moments. The narrative is that the Greeks literally saved Western civilization from Eastern despotism.
Yes, that's the standard framing.
But I want to flip the map here. If we are looking at this from the Persian perspective, sitting in the grand halls of Persepolis, was this actually an existential war for them? Or was Greece just a terribly annoying, impoverished frontier zone that simply became too expensive to hold?
That is the essential paradigm shift. For the Greeks, defeating the Persians was the defining, unifying moment of their entire civilizational history. It fueled the Athenian Golden Age, the birth of Western philosophy and theater.
Right.
But for the Persian Empire, it was a humiliating setback, certainly, and a loss of prestige. But it did not break the Achaemenid state. They didn't collapse.
They just kept going.
Persia remained vast, impossibly wealthy, and secure for another century and a half. They simply changed their strategy regarding Greece from military invasion to financial manipulation. They used their endless gold to fund different Greek city-states against each other, ensuring Greece remained violently divided.
They realized it's cheaper to buy Greek politicians than to march armies across the sea.
Exact.
But the Persian Empire does eventually fall, and the irony is that it falls to a Greek, or rather a Macedonian who idolized Greek culture, Alexander.